family wanted to gather some history on our Grandpa Rigby. And so we asked our 3 oldest first cousins to come and report, the ones who are left, and that is Mike Perkins and Richard Wright and Jack Mooney. And so you'll be seeing them remember their histories of Grandpa Rigby and stories to tell. Who's here today is Kathy and Drew Rigby, Christy and Dee Rigby, Mike and Ruthie Perkins, Richard and Jolene Wright, Jack Mooney, Dirk Rigby, Darren Rigby, and myself. We invited all, and Jeff Lambright, that's right. And yeah, I'm fixing my jewelry. Yeah, Jeff is recording this. He does this as a living, and so we're really blessed to have Jeff record this. We will make copies available for all family members to purchase if they would like one. And the date is Saturday, November 4th, 1923. 2020, what did I say, 1923? Well, there's a goober. It's 2023. I can't remember the day of the week anymore, so. Anyway, happy to have you here, and those who are viewing this after the fact, glad that you got a copy, and we'll enjoy memories of Grandpa Rigby. His full name is John William Lowe Rigby. Thank you. William Lowe. Thank you. Yeah, I need to know more of my history. Okay, I'm going to turn the time over to Mike Perkins, who's going to start this out. Thank you.
I had lots of fond memories of my grandfather Rigby, and as a kid, my initial years with him were kind of lots of fun. As I got older and learned lots of things about my grandpa that I never knew as a little boy, and as I got a lot older, I found out that he wasn't the man that I thought he was when I was a boy. When I was a boy, I would sleep in this room with him, right here, in his bed with him, along with it'd be me and Uncle Bill and Uncle Dee, all in the same bed. And that's how we slept. His 2 boys slept with him, I think, from the time that their mother died until they grew up and got married. Dee and Bill slept with him. And when I came down here to sleep, except a few other occasions when I slept with Aunt Becky, I slept mostly with my grandfather and those 2 boys. I don't know how we got to in that bed. Anyway, my grandfather Rigby never raised his voice to me. He never yelled at me. He was always kind. He was one of the kindest people I've ever met. Always gentle with me. Never raised his voice. However, when I became older, I learned something about my grandfather that I just didn't know and realize. I was talking to my grandfather Perkins, who's about, I think, 18 years younger than my grandfather Rigby. And I said, did you know my grandpa Rigby? And he said, no, I'm a lot younger. But by the time that I was a teenager, we all knew about Will Rigby, and we avoided him. He said I'd see him occasionally somewhere, and I just avoided him. And I said, well, why is that, Grandpa? And he'd say, everybody in Davis County, every man in Davis County walked absolutely in fear of your grandfather Rigby. He had such a reputation that grown men avoided him if they could. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, there are lots of stories about your grandpa Rigby. And he began telling me some of the stories that I already, some of those stories that I already knew. The first time I ever saw, I think the first and last time I ever saw my grandfather Rigby in violence was when at the University of Utah football game, the Rigbys would go down to those football games at the University of Utah, down at the south end of the stadium. It's about where they put that Olympic thing up. As you come down off that drive, there'd be a little stand there, and they would sell apples. They'd sell them for a nickel a piece. Now, I can't remember what year it was. It could have been 44 or 45. But like Becky and Jean and Ann and my mother would be there selling apples. I think Bill and Seymour might have been there a couple of times too. They'd been doing that for years. And I was probably a 4 or 5, maybe 6 years old, somewhere in that age group. I wish I could remember exactly what year it was. And I was there doing whatever I do, just walking around. But I remember the University of Utah football team came by. This is about an hour or two before the game. And they were selling the apples for a nickel. And I don't exactly know what happened because I'm a little boy, but one of the football players took an apple, and I think Grandpa said something, that'll be a nickel, and he said something to the effect of, oh, I'll eat an apple if I want to, old man. And he took a bite out of that apple, and Grandpa said again, that'll be a nickel, and the kid walked off, and Grandpa jumped across. He was probably, 1945, or he must have been close to, 68 or 70 years old. He jumped across that little thing, and planted one on that football player and knocked him out right there, and down he fell. And of course, a crowd assembled, and they carried him away. And this football player is probably 18, 19, 20, 22 years old. That's my grandpa. I had never seen him do things like that. He went right back across and began selling apples like nothing had happened. That's my Grandpa Rigby. I had never seen him do anything like that in my life, before or after. Little did I know that he was used to doing things like that. And so that's the kind of man that my grandfather Perkins knew about. This man of violence. I don't know where all that came from. There's another story. 2 other stories about him doing things like that. He was down working in a wheat field down here about where that shopping center is in Farmington. Do you know what I'm talking about? Just a little bit south of that. I knew the field that he'd worked in because Uncle Bill pointed that field out to me. I'd heard the story, and I said, where did that happen? And he pointed out the field, which is a little bit south of that shopping center. I think there's houses there now. And I said, well, tell me. So anyway, that's how I'd heard that story. The story was he was working in a wheat field, and one of the men he was working with, they were, I guess, taking a break. It was lunchtime, and he said, something about, well, I've heard how tough you are. This man that was working with has this reputation of being an absolutely deadly pugilist. Do you want to fight him? And I guess Grandpa said, well, I don't know. Well, I'm pretty sure they put him up to it. And he was supposed to be, the guy working with him in the wheat field was supposed to be the toughest pugilist in the state of Utah, so I'm told. And they took their shirts off and rolled their sleeves up, and Grandpa knocked him out. The guy barely got his thing out, and Grandpa knocked him down and knocked him out. The toughest guy in Utah. And the word got around. I often wonder about that because Grandpa was only like 5'8". He was not a very big man. His grandfather, John, on the other hand, you all know about John Rigby, who was killed when Grandpa was 2 years old. John was a pugilist from Lancashire, and he was supposedly, now I don't know what you've heard, but I heard that he was 6'4" to 6'5". He was a big man, Grandpa's father, and he was a pugilist and had killed a man in Lancashire, and it's one of the reasons he came to Utah. So I assume that our grandfather had that fighting spirit that he got from John, his father, but John died when he was 2, so Grandpa never learned to fight from John. My grandfather Perkins told me a story that I'd heard from other people, and I said, well, Grandpa, tell me the story about the lagoon. This is my Grandpa Perkins. This is he told me this probably in the 50s, I suppose, in the 51. And I've heard it from about 8 different people. It was lagoon. This is the lagoon where they used to have the big dance hall, and he'd been down there with a friend of his, and I don't know can't remember the name of the friend, but the guy had broken his leg. So Grandpa and him took their buggy down to Lagoon. This is probably about 1897, 1895, somewhere in there. Grandpa was probably 18 to 19 years old. And so they went to Lagoon to dance. The guy who broke his leg couldn't dance, and he was sitting on the side over there, and there was a bunch of hooligans. I don't know where they're from, probably Layton. So anyway, they began making fun or something of his friend, and I guess Grandpa said, put an end to this nonsense. And I don't know what all happened, but they made a mistake. Finally, Grandpa said, that's the end of it. You can take me on all at once or one at a time. And they made a mistake because he took them on one at a time. And there were 5 of them. And Grandpa downed each of them one at a time, knocked them down and put them down the floor. And they stopped the dance, and Grandpa put them down just like that, knocked them down, all 5 of them. And then they got the manager, and they hold them together, and they whistled and something. They got the sheriff down there, and they took him up there and locked him, all 5 of them, up at the Hoosgow in Farmington. Now, the Hoosgow in Farmington, I've been there. It's gone now. It used to be at the corner. I don't know if you remember the old jail. They all locked him up in there. And somebody made a complaint about Grandpa, and they locked him up in there too. Locked him up in there too, until finally somebody realized, hey, you don't need to lock him up in there. Those 5 guys are the ones that took care of Grandpa. That story went on, and so if you lived in Davis County in 1895 to 1897, everybody knew the story of Will Rigby putting those 5 guys down. So he was not a man to toy with. I mean, I just don't know. I haven't met anybody who's that tough. I don't know. I've never met anybody. Well, I have met some tough men who could probably do that, but they were very rare people who could do something like that. And so he had a fearsome reputation. So now I'll get to the next story that my mother told me, and then it was told to me again by other people. And when I was here, up here about 2 months ago, came up to visit Helen, and I asked him, I said, I want to walk up to this point. So up here, there used to be a ditch that goes along up here, just above that little reservoir up there, and you could go through the ditch, and the ditch went along out there to, well, I went up there, the ditch is gone. I walked up and down, I could not find that ditch. But up until about 15 years ago, the ditch was there. So Grandpa, now my mother was 3 years old, so that would have made it 1919. And Grandpa went up to change the water up there. Anyway, he went up to change the water, and there was 3 men standing there. And he changed the water, and they changed it back. It was his water. If you know anything about water, you get your time and day, and you go change your water. He changed the water, and they changed it back. Well, he changed the water again, and by that time, my mother, who's a little girl, she didn't understand what's going on, and she still had no idea, but she remembered everything that day because she was scared absolutely to death. So they told him something, the words. Now, I didn't hear that from her, but I heard it from some other, that he was to go back down to his farm and not to mess with the water anymore. If he was smart, he would not mess with the water. They didn't realize who they're messing with. And so he knew all 3 of them. So he knew that 2 of them were ne'er-do-wells, or not very good people. The other person he knew pretty well, and that person saved his life. Because he changed the water, and as he turned to leave, the one of them said to him, "Will, watch out." And as he turned to see what he was talking about, one of the men took the shovel, and he turned it sideways, and it was going to take it down through the top of his head. He turned the shovel sideways and took it down top of his head. It had killed him. But when he turned, it came down, and I'm not sure if it hit the left shoulder or right shoulder, but it came down and broke his collarbone right here. But that was his worst mistake because he didn't kill him. Grandpa then, my mother, I guess, I don't know whether he told, I'm not sure whether he told my mother to wrap, but anyway, my mother wrapped her arms around his leg, and so he fought those three men with my mother, with one arm, and my mother wrapped around his leg, and he knocked the man down who he just turned and knocked him down with that one fist, knocked the man down who had took the shovel to him, and then he I guess he hit him again until he was going to kill him, and then the other man tried to attack him, and he took care of that other guy and knocked him down. Those two were left bloody and unconscious, and the other man, he told him, you better leave, or something like that, and the other man ran away. So now he's got two men bloody and unconscious there, and he's got a broken collarbone here, shoulder bone and collarbone. And so he picked my mother up and walked down here to the farmhouse. And I'm not sure what exactly happened then, but the man who ran down the road got on. I guess he left his horse down here and got on his horse and rode into Farmington. And next thing you know, they had the marshal up here from Farmington, and they arrested Grandpa for attempted murder, and they took him to a doctor, and they put him in a cast or whatever. Then they put him in the house gal down here in Farmington, and he stayed there for 2 or 3 days. And meanwhile, he's got all these kids. He's got Mabel, and he's got Becky, and I think Grandma was pregnant with Mabel. I think she was pregnant with Becky then. Anyway, the guy who finally ran and got the sheriff finally confessed to what was going on, and they let him out. He'd been hired by I can't remember he was hired by one of his neighbors here he was told to go up and convince Will Rigby that he should not have his water rights. He should give those water rights to me. One of his neighbors here. I don't know which neighbor that was, but that's who hired those three guys to go up and you could do anything you wanted. Apparently, I'm not sure exactly what he said, but you can do anything you want to convince Will Rigby to give those rights. You can beat him up. You can do anything you want to. He paid him a considerable amount of money for those days. I'm not sure what it was, but it was a considerable amount. Those two ended up in jail. The neighbor, I think, got off because they couldn't prove it. That's our grandpa, that tough guy. I mean, can you imagine with a shoulder caved in, probably pretty serious and in pain, knocking two men down and beating them unconscious. And so that's our grandpa, a tough guy. And so I did not know any of those stories until I was a teenager, and then that's when I learned all those stories. We were talking about a rock, that rock used to sit out here. Yeah, it was a pretty good sized rock. So I asked Becky one day, I guess I was about 10 or 12, well, what's that rock doing there? And she said, well, that's the rock that hit your grandpa in the chest. And then she told me about when they were building the wall over here. He was over there working. He needed the money too, so he was working over there on the wall, and the rock came up and came off and hit him in the chest. Anybody else would have killed, but he was all bruised for a day or two, and then he went right back to work again. So.